2013. Our host today is Mr. Joe Puckett, Director of Recruiting and Training for PC Helps. Joe has over 20 years' experience in technology applications and support. At PC Helps, he leads the development of both internal and client-facing training courses and materials for Microsoft products and for many other applications which PC Helps support. Joe has been researching and testing Windows 8 and speaking with PC Helps clients about it as they evaluate and plan their upgrades. And he'll share some of his observations today. With that, Joe, I'll hand it over to you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. This webcast topic was suggested by some of our clients, and I see that we do have some of them with us on the line, and please, a special welcome to you all. There are also quite a few people who may not have personal experience with me or PC Helps, so I will take just a moment to share a little bit about who we are and what we do to provide some understanding of our perspective and areas of expertise. First of all, relax. We don't sell Microsoft products or Apple products or Google products. What we do is we help companies that have purchased products like these fully realize the expected benefits of those purchases. We do that by providing specialized services for end users as an addition to existing help desk and training services. While we cover a lot of ground, the vast majority of what we do is around Microsoft Office, the operating systems it runs in, and mobile devices. Immediate phone-based support is our primary service, but we also offer other things to help other needs. So we offer other services as well. For end users, these include instructor-led training, self-paced training, some self-service support resources, and other kinds of resources they may find useful. We also work with IT leaders on anticipating end user needs and finding ways to meet them. That has involved us in many migrations. Our first Windows migration was from 3.1 to 95. Migrations to Windows 8 have many of those same challenges, plus some new wrinkles. So let's take a look at what all we're going to be covering today. And we will cover some of what's new in Windows 8. But our focus will be on those aspects that affect organizations and how they affect those organizations. Getting people the right device with the right things on it to really make them productive is a very big challenge for IT, but it is a manageable challenge, and it's one we help with very regularly. So we will touch on this throughout the webcast. Windows 8 was shaped by the same forces that have produced an array of mobile device policies. So we're going to take a look at those and try to help you see how you can tie Windows 8 and your policy or policies you may be considering together. Organizational readiness is a huge topic, but we will address as many aspects as we can in our time together. And the one thing we most want to do in this time together is have you be confident that you know how you should go about evaluating Windows 8 and how it may fit into your organization in particular. So what is new with Windows 8? Well, there's a lot new with Windows 8, so we can't really begin to cover it all in this webcast, but we're going to hit a few highlights and try to provide some understanding of the depth and significance of these new features and changes. One of the things that you will notice is that Windows 8 reflects the variety of device types, form factors, and human input devices that are now available. We will take a look at the versions of Windows 8, what they run on, and why that will matter to you as you consider or plan a migration to Windows 8 or anticipate it arriving in your space, whether you've invited it or not. Have you ever noticed that when you go to a restaurant that the server puts your order in on a touch screen? Those things are everywhere. A related irony is that they increasingly deliver information without being touched. In Windows 8, that is implemented through live tiles. And as we look at the Windows 8 interface, clearly it was made with the possibility of touch screens in mind. We'll also talk about the new interface and some of the effects that it has, some of the new elements of it. There are things called a charms bar, a start menu. And one of the things that I keep hearing is that the new interface is something that experts don't necessarily like. We'll take a look at that and why that may be the case. We won't be able to cover all of the different kinds of things that are in Windows 8, but we do have some Windows 8 videos on the PC Helps YouTube channel that will actually cover those items and give you a really quick, it takes about 5 minutes, tour to find out exactly what those are. We won't say very much about cloud computing or Microsoft's implementation of it through SkyDrive, but you can't mention any new technology device without mentioning how it is affected by cloud integration, and in this case with Windows 8, cloud integration is just a native part of it. Here's some good news. Windows 8 has a reputation of being very secure. It surprised me when I started reading security experts saying that a Microsoft operating system might be too secure. Not used to hearing that. Security isn't our area of expertise, but we will mention some specific features that make a difference at the end user level. So what exactly is new, why did they do Windows 8? One of the cynical answers that I've heard is that, well, Microsoft needs to make money and they need a new product to do that. But when you look at Windows 8, they apparently actually didn't do it that way. Because the best strategy for making a lot of money with a new product is to add some desirable new features without rocking the boat, so that adoption just becomes a no-brainer and becomes very easy. But Windows 8 rocks the boat. So why did they take that course? And what we need to consider is that Windows 8 is a response to the forces in the marketplace that have led to the buzz over consumerization, BYOD, and the related acronym SOUP. One way I like to illustrate these forces is to talk about my daughter and myself. My introduction to computers was at work. To me, a computer or any kind of a digital device is inherently a work thing. It feels like a work thing. My daughter grew up in a house where there always were computers, and then cell phones, and then smartphones. To her, digital devices inherently feel personal. That makes a difference in expectations. Nowadays, she works in an environment where they have very high security needs, both network and data security. And so she understands intellectually why she can't use her personal smartphone to receive corporate information, and why she can't get her personal information on her corporate-issued smartphone. She understands it intellectually, but it will never feel right to her. And feel is very important. I know that as IT people, we tend to put an emphasis on thinking. So find a salesperson and talk to them about how much feel has to do with decisions getting made at companies. And so it really is very important. And remember, people not much older than my daughter are beginning to show up in executive suites. And their expectation is that multiple connected devices that hold both professional and personal information is the new normal. If that doesn't work for you and your organization, you will be pushing a big rock up a long hill, because that is what is expected now. Some aspects of Windows 8 may make the rock smaller or the hill shorter. Failing to understand Windows 8 and the forces that led to it will do the opposite. Now, what about that new interface? Is anybody really sure what the name of it is? Okay, at first it was Metro, and then it was Modern, and lately it's become the Windows Experience Interface, officially. Well, I'm going to call it Modern during this webcast because Windows Experience is too much of a mouthful, and if you shorten it to Wii, it gets confused with a game console. So we're just going to call it the Modern Interface. It's that thing when you first open Windows 8. It's characterized by the start screen and some of the other new elements. It really is very different. And it gets carried across Windows 8 devices that run on all sorts of sizes of things. And what leads to the challenge is you look at it, you realize it was made with touch in mind, but not everybody's on a touch device. So we'll cover a lot of those dynamics and how you can plan for them, compensate for them, and what effects you just can't avoid. Speaking of effects that you can't avoid, if you think you will not get Windows 8 in your enterprise, let me share something that we went through with some clients when iPads were coming out. We had a number of folks who just said there will be no iPads in our environment. And that was until the CEO got one for Christmas. These things have a habit of finding their way in. And when they do, it's really very useful to have a plan. Now, we do want you to share with the group something about your current environment, and that'll also help us kind of target our comments as we go along. And so in just a second, I'll flip over to an interactive piece where you'll be able to share with us if your current environment is predominantly one of these versions of a Microsoft operating system. So please, here comes the interactive part. Please make your choice now, and as you've done that, you'll be able to see a chart that shows you what other people have indicated. Okay, you see quite a few people going in. Nobody on Vista yet. I'm not really surprised by that. One thing I would note about Vista, Vista's failure was not trying to do too much. It was trying to take too much of the past along with it. And that'll actually come up again because 7's approach to that and 8's approach to that are pretty significantly different. And as a result, then it's one of the considerations we need to make. Okay, looks like we've got pretty much everybody in. So I'm going to close the poll at this point and give you a chance to look at it. Apparently we're mostly on Windows 7, but we do have a significant number of folks who are on XP, and so there's some things we definitely want to mention. They're probably things you're already aware of, but rather than take a chance because they're pretty important things. Okay, so if you're on one platform and you're thinking about any possibility of going to Windows 8, and if you're on XP and you're thinking about going to 7 or 8, there are some things to consider. One thing is you may have heard some negative buzz about the Windows 8 interface. And I mentioned before that sometimes you hear about usability experts don't like Windows 8. I was confused by that because while it is very different, I didn't find it that difficult to adapt to. And so why was it these people who have more credentials in that area than I do did? And I think I finally began to understand that when somebody forwarded a link to a YouTube video to me. And the person doing this, and in tone, it was more of a rant, but kept saying, you know, an operating system is supposed to allow you to work faster. Well, that's very true. But in his case, it actually slowed him down. And I'm like, that is the opposite of my experience. How did this happen? But then I began to catch on because he presented, gave a list of the standard kinds of things that are interface usability standards, and he kept coming back to navigation must be consistent. And that's when the light bulb went on for me. And I'm really kind of surprised that it didn't for him because he was putting his opinion in a YouTube video. How do you get to YouTube videos? You go to your browser and you type in youtube.com and search features, then find the IP address of a YouTube server and connect you. You then get an interface that doesn't say, hey, have fun spending many hours navigating through the millions of videos we have to find the ones you want. It assumes you're going to search because there's just too much stuff to find by navigating. Well, Windows 7 and Office 2007 mark a time when there were aspects of their operating systems and Office products where Microsoft said, hey, the navigate or the search and bookmark approach that people are used to using on the internet is actually better than the navigate approach that we've always been building into our products when you get to this particular thing. An example, Windows 7, finding an app that you don't use all the time. It is so much faster to search for it than it is to navigate to it. Looking for an email, search for it in Outlook 2007 and later. don't sort it 93 different ways and look for it. It's much faster to search. And the other thing about a search and bookmark approach is then when you bookmark things, you can build your own navigation system that has only the things you want and is arranged exactly the way you want it, and if your needs change, you change it. So this really is a better approach to a lot of things as software and operating systems have gotten much more complicated. Microsoft has started adopting that, but I don't think everyone who looks at things through the lens of traditional ways of evaluating these things has necessarily caught on to that's what Microsoft was doing, because Microsoft didn't make an announcement, hey, here's what we're doing. It might have been helpful if they had done that. And Windows 8 is very clearly, in many places, using search and bookmark rather than navigate. And it's one of the things that needs to get communicated to people as they're adopting Windows 8, or they're going to have that same negative experience of this thing doesn't work for me. One other thing that is worth noting is that Windows 8 is a transitional version. It clearly has two interfaces. And parts of each interface use navigation, parts use the search and bookmark approach. If I had to put a bet on which of those two interfaces is going to survive into Windows 9, 10, and 11, it's the modern interface, not the familiar desktop interface that is still in all versions of Windows 8. But I suspect that's something that's going to be phased out over a little bit of time. Now, many people are also saying that, and this affects your Windows XP, Windows XP, if you're on that, you have a deadline. You're probably aware of that deadline, but just in case you're not, it's April 8th, 2014. And why is that? That's because Microsoft is going to stop making security updates. And of course, you can't be using an unpatched operating system, and so you're going to have to move on by that date. So the question is 7 or 8, and we'll give you some information about that. But security actually does kind of feed into this, because everything I'm reading from the people who know more about security than I do says that Windows 8 is inherently more secure than any previous version of Windows. So if the reason you're moving is that you need security, it's going to be worth looking into if the security features in Windows 8 in your circumstance actually are enough better than those in 7 that it's going to matter to you when you make that decision. The other thing is, if you tend to wait until you really need to move to the next operating system, as has happened with Windows XP, okay, you're going to get longer until you have to do that again if you go to Windows 8. So that's another thing that won't be your deciding factor, but it is a pretty good thing to consider. We're also hearing a lot about compatibility issues being very similar in 7 and 8. So if you're moving from XP, and you're going to have to do some compatibility things with proprietary systems, some back-end things, whether you go to 7 or 8. And everything we're hearing is that those are roughly equivalent, different enough that doing one doesn't necessarily automatically do the other, but they are roughly equivalent because they work in many ways much the same. And another factor to take a look at is if you decide, okay, we're going to move to Windows 7 because there's things we don't care about for Windows 8, it doesn't really seem to be a good fit for us, remember, it may still end up in your environment. Now, implications for business users. Whether you're moving from XP to 7 or 7 to 8, people are going to see an interface change. If it's from either of those to 8, that change is going to be bigger. It's going to take more training, more education, more hand-holding to get people back up to speed. The other thing that is, if you choose 8, you really need to take a look at versions of Office. Because if you're moving to 8, you're going to have people on touchscreen devices, and Office 2010 was not designed for, and previous versions were not designed for touch. Office 2013 has a significant number of new features that really are, and it's really designed from the ground up to be used much more with a touch interface. And so that might be a factor that you need to keep in mind when you make that decision. Because, and again, compatibility. There are some things in Office 2013 that are not entirely compatible with previous versions. For the most part, they are not things that are going to affect very many people in your organization, but there are a few. So if you're going to go to 8, you need to consider 2013, and you need to be aware of what those things are and dig into it. Okay, again, we're going to ask you to share a little bit of information that will help us target things and also make sure that we're thinking of things in the same way. And I mentioned that acronym soup. Well, here's a good helping of it. The phrase BYOD, bring your own device, has been so much in the press, you've undoubtedly heard it. But we've seen really two variants of it. And of course, it's where the employee brings their device. You may make a list of acceptable devices, but the company brings it. You may reimburse them, but the person brings it. It's their device. Some companies are choosing to support those devices. Typically, they will put limits on which devices are acceptable for BYOD in that case. This really gets to be difficult because you get so many different permutations of what can go on, and especially with the iOS and Android devices, because many of the things that people want to do, there's no clear, this is the app you do that with. There are many popular apps, and they of course all work a little differently, and so providing that support can be a real big challenge. We deal with a lot of questions about that. So another option is to say, okay, you can bring your own device, but we're not going to provide support. This is also risky in a way, not only because people might be dissatisfied, but the whole point of the mobile device is to make them productive when they are not in the office. And if they don't have support, they're not going to be as productive. Also, then you don't have the intelligence line of finding out what it is they're actually using, and because while these apps are all checked by the store that downloads them, you may want to know what it is they're using on these things. And so another alternative has come out, and it's called COPE. Corporate-owned, personally enabled. And basically, you become the store. And the advantage of this is now you own the device. In many cases, you own the relationship with the carrier that's going to actually provide voice and data services for these things. So it gives you a lot more control of what's going on. Of course, there's still standard corporate issue, which is we buy it, we give it to you, we control it, and there are high security environments where, as of this date, that's really very necessary. But again, it does not match what people, especially younger people, have come to expect. And of course, you can do almost any combination of those things. So let's take a moment for you to provide feedback on those things. And okay, there's our interactive slide. If you would be so kind as to share with us what your current policy is on that. And I see we're getting a lot of results very quickly. I thank you for that. And we'll just give you a few more seconds. Oh, very interesting. I'm seeing a lot more combination approaches than I have before. I cannot actually do all this and watch chat at the same time, but if anybody was interested in chatting in, if they do their combination on some scheme like by department or by job function or something, I think our other people who are watching the chat stream would be very interested in knowing how that comes about. Okay, I'm going to close the poll out now. And so you should definitely be seeing those results. And let's move on to talking about specific people and how the whole Windows 8 choices and things like that affect them. We're going to take a look at 4 real quick profiles. We'll come back to 3 of them in more details. But a key thing to understand is that not everybody works the same way. And for example, executives, they may love tablets, but what's kept them from doing that so far is that they tend to be very heavy users of standard Office kind of programs, and they also tend to be very heavy users of proprietary line of business apps. And because current tablets don't really support those things in very convenient ways, executives have not moved to tablets as much as their mobility might lead you to believe that they would. Now, on the other hand, salespeople are so mobile that they have tended to move to tablets, even if it meant that they were running around most of the time with a device that really wasn't all that convenient for content creation or for connecting to proprietary line of business apps, and may not necessarily the browser on it work really well with their centralized sales reporting systems. But the mobility is so important to them that they're willing to do that, and in many cases end up carrying both a tablet and a laptop. So they tend to be on the forefront of this. On the other hand, you have the managers, and particularly people in finance are who I have in mind for this. And finance people like big screens and separate numeric keypads. Those are things you don't get on tablets. And they also tend to not be nearly as mobile unless they're part of that executive group as a lot of other managers, and certainly compared to salespeople. And so for them, there's not been very much movement to the tablet kind of devices. Now, if you begin to do that, and especially if you end up using Windows 8 tablets, you may discover that you run into having people using Office 2013 RT, and we'll explain a little more about that. But where it may impact your finance people and your managers who do a lot of the number crunching in general is they very often are building financial models. And sometimes they may use a tool called Power Pivots. It's an extension of Excel for that. And depending on the tools, the people who are using this after they've built it are on, you may discover some incompatibilities and just inability to use some of those things. And let's not forget our administrative folk. They tend to be much less mobile, and as a result, we haven't seen a lot of activity on tablets. And the other thing that would really stop them is they are very, very dependent on Word and Excel in particular, and also PowerPoint. And since there were no really great solutions for those things available on tablets, adoption's been a little bit slower. So with all that in mind, how do we figure out what device is appropriate for which group of people? Now, I'm not going to go over all of these. I'm only going to actually cover the top line. But it's probably a good idea to look through them because they are things you may run into, and they're also things that you may want to put in for Q&A at the end if it's of particular interest to you. But we do want to take a look at the legends down here because they're there to help understand the thing. And many of you may have researched this enough to understand it, but we'll go over it in case we have some people that aren't as familiar or haven't had a chance to dig into it. Windows 8 comes in 3 groupings of licenses. There's just Windows 8, which if you're familiar with the previous versions, Home Premium is pretty much what that was. There's also Windows 8 Professional or Enterprise, which is much like the Professional Enterprise in previous versions. Now, those versions run only on x64, x86 platforms, things that you would normally associate with a desktop or a laptop computer. So I call that a laptop equivalent. So, and the capabilities of the interface, and we're going to take a look at one glaring example of a difference in capabilities of the versions of Windows. What you can do depends on those capabilities. Which of those you can run depends on the hardware. So these things are inextricably linked. Now, the other alternative is Windows 8 RT. It is the Windows 8 that runs on ARM devices with ARM processors, things that you would more associate with an iPad or an Android tablet. And they do have certain advantages. However, the capabilities of Windows 8 RT are different. In some cases, they're actually more corporate friendly than the Windows 8 just by itself, which was like the Home Premium. But in other cases, they're less so. And so it's not a nice, real consistent, you work your way down the line and you just know you're going to, if you go to the top one, you're going to get everything you want, and as you move down, you're going to get fewer things. It's spotty. And so you really have to work through what is important for you and what is not. And the one thing I wanted to highlight here, pretty standard thing to connect a device to a Windows domain. If you have Windows 8, what we used to be called Home Premium, or Windows 8 RT, you can't do that directly. You have to have Windows 8 Pro or Enterprise, which means if somebody needs to connect to a Windows domain, they need to be running laptop equivalent hardware. So these are the kinds of things that not only do you need to be aware of, but if you're going into any, and we saw we have some folks, quite a few folks that have kind of a mixed approach to bring your own device, consumerization kinds of things. So if Windows 8 devices are going to be part of that, you really need to get out in front and let people know that to do the things they need to do for their job, this kind of Windows will work, that kind won't. Because otherwise you may get people who buy hardware and then find out that what they bought just was not what is actually going to work for the purpose for which they bought it. Okay, let's take a look at some very specific profiles of people a little more closely and how some of these things come into play with those folks. So let's take a look at executives. And having worked with our marketing department, I've been educated to know that this thing over here is an infographic. Great term, communicates well. And what this tells us is to what extent they're mobile, to what extent they tend to work in a corporate office or work off by themselves in a virtual office, and what their level of tech motivation is. Actually, what we found is tech motivation when you're moving to something new is actually more important than tech savvy. People that are really savvy but not motivated, it's still really hard to get them up to speed on something new. So how are the executives? Okay, they're very, very, very mobile. So while they haven't been doing tablets now, what's been holding them back is the ability to use those things they use, such as heavy calendaring. They tend to be very much using tasks in Outlook or some other thing that runs on their desktop. And tablets so far have not been very good at doing that. And as a result, they've not been a good choice for them. They also use a lot of proprietary line of business apps, so unless that's going to be ported over to various mobile platforms, that's just not going to work for them. Well, now you have the option of a form factor that's nice and light and moves well, but it's based on laptop architecture and runs the same Windows that you would run on a laptop or desktop. You can install Outlook or Notes or whatever else you're using that might have your tasks in it, and you get the full functionality of that. You get the full functionality of Calendar. You can install anything on it you could have installed on their desktop or laptop. And so they get the portability, but all the power. So that is very, very helpful to them. And Windows 8, because of that and the new devices available, may be very attractive to them. Now, in terms of tech motivation, you may have noticed that executives are pretty busy. And as a result, they don't want to spend a lot of their time on day-to-day things like learning a new operating system or new software. And so you need to make accommodation for that. One thing that we do suggest is paying special attention to their exec admins if you're going to move executives to Windows 8. Because no matter what you do in terms of formal structures for support, an executive is going to turn to their admin for tech support first, rather than your formal structures. And as a result, to really have it work well and to garner a positive opinion from the executive about this move, the exec admin has to be prepared through training and extra support for them to fulfill that role successfully. Okay, let's take a look at another extremely mobile group, sales. They are all mobile. They're almost never in a corporate office. And the big drawback to them so far, even though they've widely adopted tablets, is that the tablets really don't do a very good job of handling Microsoft Office type documents, Word documents, PowerPoint documents, Excel documents. There's lots of programs out there that do it, but none that really do it really well. And so they frequently end up carrying also a laptop that has regular stuff. And they really don't like that because they're moving around a lot. They are fairly tech motivated, but one of the problems is that when they do need support, they are not in the places you're usually equipped to provide support for them. So they can be really difficult in training. Try to schedule salespeople for training. If you're going to be moving something new to salespeople, these are things to pay very, very careful attention to. You will reap great rewards if you find a way to increase their ability to actually create content on a very small mobile device. Now, given the way they work, they may appreciate the longer battery life of an ARM-based device. So Windows 8 RT and Office 2013 RT could actually be a good choice for many salespeople. Now, I'm not an expert in licensing, but I know that you need to be careful about Office 2013 RT licensing. For example, Microsoft Surface devices, not the Surface Pro necessarily, it's coming out on February 9th, which is a laptop equivalent, but the Surface that's ARM-based. And yes, my apologies for how confusing that is. But there's Surface, Surface Pro, different hardware, different operating system. But the RT devices, actually, because they're so light and have longer battery life, would be a pretty good match for the salespeople. But Office 2013 that comes with them is a home and student edition. And using that for business violates the EULA unless the user has been allocated an Office 2013 license some other way. Now, this is something to consider if you're considering equipping specific people in your organization with these devices, but also if you go to anything where people get to pick their own devices, you need to educate them about this because otherwise you're going to end up with licensing headaches because they bought something they thought they could use for business purposes but cannot legally do so. Another important thing for very mobile people is that, again, you need to plan for them to not be where you need them to be when you need to do training and support for them. So those are the absolute key things for sales folks. Now, your finance manager, notice they're all corporate office. Sometimes they'll work from other places or maybe not their office. They're moderately tech motivated, but they really care about data crunching things, not operating systems and software that goes with it. So for them, they are probably going to be your most content group to with Windows 7 or if they're to move to Windows 7, or if they're already in Windows 7 to just stay there even if everybody else is going to Windows 8. Of course, any kind of mix in your equipment, etc., does add complications to any plan, but be aware that there are some people in your organization, and finance folks are among the most likely that there's less benefit for them. So unless the benefit of moving to Windows 8 for other reasons such as security and other things just outweighs anything else, then the finance people, there's not nearly as much reason to move them along. And that applies for other people who tend to work the way they work. Let's take a look at that from a slightly different perspective, some of the pros and cons of using Windows 8 with various devices. For the executives, they finally have that device that is light, fast, easy, and does everything they need it to do. If your executives are mobile, it is a really good fit. Biggest problem, they're not very patient. They don't have time to invest in learning something, so getting them to make a switch to something that is this very, very different can really be a challenge. You need to plan for it. A big part of that, of course, is bringing their exec admins along and also making sure that they are aware of what they are getting and how this will allow them to be as mobile as they want to be and yet do everything they need to do no matter where they are. Salespeople, again, if they're lugging currently a tablet, but also a laptop because they need to create stuff, Windows 8 can solve that problem for them. You need to really work closely with them on understanding how things work, and in terms of how they work and how much creation they do, what sorts of things they do, because the RT devices actually have a lot of attraction for folks like this, but they do have certain limitations, and we need to make sure those don't work. Again, be aware, just the logistics. You've worked with salespeople before. Logistics with a really, really mobile group, everything just becomes more difficult. So you have to plan further ahead. You really have to identify the people that they work with who actually can do something about connecting them when you need them connected, because they are very important partners in this. The finance folks, you don't want to ignore them, and if you do need to make a change to what they do, you want to get them in early on that. However, they are not the folks that you need to really be most concerned about under most cases. So what about hardware? Will Windows 8 run on your existing hardware? I don't know if you've ever read Walt Mossberg of the Wall Street Journal. He's a very perceptive technology writer. Love the stuff he does. But I was a little surprised when he wrote an article where he decided to install Windows 8 on some existing devices, and he ran into some trouble. And then he admitted, well, I kind of didn't bother going out and getting the readiness tools that Microsoft has published for every version of Windows in the last couple decades, or last decade anyhow. You need to do that. For the most part, if you go out to the Windows 8 site and you look at what it requires, and you go back and you look at what they said it was required for Windows 7, they track pretty closely together. And in terms of a rough estimate, that's very true. But anytime you change back-end security things, etc., you have the potential for problems. What Walt Mossberg ran into was an issue where drivers that worked great in Windows 7 and the vendor was initially indicating, oh yeah, this will work in Windows 8, didn't, and then he went out to his vendors and found out, oh yeah, they discovered that and they created a new driver for it. And these things, it only takes one thing to really, really make it difficult to move old hardware onto a new operating system. This is something you want to start working on early and find your problems, because it may really make or break as to whether you can go to 7 or 8, or if you can move from 7 to 8, because it's going to increase. If it's fixable, it increases your costs. If it's not, and you have to buy new stuff, that really affects your budget. And also remember that if it doesn't work well on the hardware, it will not work well for people, and then we won't get those effects that we were hoping of increased productivity. It would be so nice every now and then just to be the hero who gave them something they love. And if the hardware doesn't support it well, that's not going to happen. Now, the other thing that we need to take a look at is budget. And one of your overall challenges here is that any kind of a movement that affects everybody in the organization is going to affect budgets other than yours. And you need to identify those people and make sure you bring them in as early partners rather than allow them to become problems late in the process when they discover it impacts their budget. So take a look around and think about those things, because it is going to affect any group you're rolling something like this out to. It's going to take their time to go to training, to get used to it. They're going to be a little slower on it at first. And those things do affect other people's budgets, and so you need to get that across to people early on. What are some of these support challenges? Okay, as soon as you have more than one operating system or Office version in an enterprise, it creates support challenges. That's one of the reasons why the whole iPad and other and like Android tablet thing was so resisted, because it was a new operating system, and with those things you have so many different apps that people might be using, and of course they interact differently with the operating system, and just supporting all those things was really, really very difficult. And as a result, a lot of organizations just said that is not practical for us, and so they avoided it. Now here Windows 8 may give you an opportunity, because if there's a version of Windows 8 and hardware that'll do everything your people need to do, you're going to get a lot more consistency. Because one of the things that if you look at Office 2013, if that's what you had ended up using on some of the Windows 8 devices, it works and acts very much like Office 2010. In fact, my first and mistaken impression of it was, oh, there's nothing new here. Well, there actually is quite a bit new, and we'll go into that in another webcast maybe. But people will have that experience. They'll, oh, I know what this is. And if you switch on some of the touch features, it looks a little different. But people that need to do that will appreciate that it does make it easier to use on a touch interface. And so this may actually narrow down the number of things that you need to contend with in terms of your support operation, your training operations, because you'll be able to get everybody onto something that meets their needs but is much more similar. Another big issue is, we don't have a poll for this, but I would love to see the average number of high priority projects each of us has. Each of you guys has. It's got to be really high. And with the different versions, this just adds more. And again, this is aimed at mobile people, and mobile people are tougher to train, they're tougher to support, they're tougher to deploy to. And so we can expect some challenges there. Okay, now let's take a look at something of a roadmap for getting from wherever you are to where you need to be. First thing is IT needs to be the people with the whole picture. Unless your picture includes an understanding of why the emerging workforce wants multiple devices, BYOD, and cloud, those who understand these things, but not things like network and data security, may make more compelling arguments. You want to be able to make the argument in the most compelling way. So it's important to keep you in that leadership role. To do that, you can't take a one-size-fits-all approach. You need to really put the business user's needs front and center. Because people work differently, and one of the things that the operating system is about is allowing people to work in the various ways they need to. That means you're not going to be able to do everything you want to do, and you will not be able to keep everybody happy. So you need to establish a priority and make sure the resources are used where they're going to get you the things that have to be done, and that you also have a plan for explaining why certain things can't be done. Wouldn't it really be nice to, instead of being treated like plumbing and only getting attention when things go bad, to shine for a change? This could be your opportunity to do that, because as the workforce gets more mobile and needs to do more things on the road, this is a big need, and if you find an effective way of answering that, they will be very happy with you. Consider doing things like setting up a device bar where you put the previous 3 generations of laptops, and now you show them the new mobile devices that can do everything those did, but are so much faster and lighter and nicer to use when you're a mobile person. That will get you some really positive attention. Make sure that when you communicate, you expand your planning vision in time and scope. While the hardware and software migration may be over, the migration isn't over till the end users are reaping the benefits of having these new tools. It isn't enough to deliver the system. You actually have to deliver the effect and the benefits. Make sure that when you do communicate, that you communicate people and benefits, not just systems. Again, budget for the big picture. It just does not end when you get the rollout done. There are other things that have to be included. There are other people that are affected, and if you don't do that, then your budget will be incomplete. Also, maintain that open feedback loop with users. A tendency is because you're so rushed that you listen and then run. Well, you don't want to wait too long after you've given people something to listen, but because they'll think you really don't care, and they'll have forgotten some of their initial impressions. But they also take a while to really learn the operating system, the software, and everything. And so their first impressions may not be their complete impression. So you need to go back to people a little bit later. Okay. We, of course, want to offer you some additional information. We would, and as I said before, this topic was actually something that some of our clients suggested to us. And we have two primary sources of information about what makes a difference in an organization as they adapt and use technologies. One is that we answer thousands of end-user questions every day. And wow, that really tells you some stuff. But the other is people like you sharing your perspective, and so we really do want your questions. So if you have other questions, now we're going to do Q&A in just a second here. But if you have other questions, there's an address to send them to. We also try to prompt questions, and our PC Helps blog is one way of doing that. And if you have other questions or comments, please, there's my email address. Please feel free to email me. And if I'm not actually the best person to answer your question, I will get it routed to somebody that can. Okay, let's take a look at the questions. They're actually getting the questions to me right at the moment. Okay, the first one that came out. Oh, this is interesting. Somebody's been doing some homework. Are the Windows Store and the Office Store the same thing? Yes and no. A lot of similarities, because they're both all about security. They're both curated, meaning Microsoft proofs the things, and then they both allow you to set up like a private section in a store that's just your company. The difference is that Windows is for apps, and Office is for things that used to be done through add-ins. Part of the security improvement in Windows 8 and Office 2013 in certain versions is that they really limit the ability to use add-ins and plugins. So for example, Avery has for a long time made a Word add-in to use their labels. Well, now they make an Office app, and when you download it, you know it came from Microsoft. You know it probably really was Avery. Whereas if you just install an add-in from the web, do you ever really know? So that's the main things there. Okay, question about MS Surface compared to iPad for someone like a salesperson. Okay, we did touch on this a little bit, but apparently a little more information. The biggest difference is how easy it is to work with, particularly in terms of creating and modifying documents that are in Microsoft Office formats. Because there is no really standard tool for any of the other tablets that does quite what Word or Excel or PowerPoint does. They can open the files, but they can't really do quite the same things. The other thing is that iOS has one of the ways they've done security is by giving each app a little silo to put their information in. And as a result, trying to get anything from one app to another is really difficult. Now, one of the things about Windows 8 is it comes with File Explorer, which replaced Windows Explorer. And when you open Windows 8, go to File Explorer. There are some really great new features in there, like the ability to copy the path of something to the clipboard really easily. Also, little checkbox things, which I'm kind of sad to admit, that was actually available in Windows 7, but it was really, really buried and you couldn't find it. But File Explorer uses the ribbon interface and it exposed it right away. And I went back and later and found it in Windows 7. that makes it so much easier to work on files than when you're on one of these siloed environments. Android is a little less siloed, but there's still really nothing all that great for it. And again, you just don't have the tools people have kind of gotten used to that are pretty full-featured and really work the same way as the one they have on their desktop or laptop and may have been using for many years. Okay, I'm looking at the next one. Okay, I keep hearing that Windows 8 is only for mobile devices. Can you really use it on a desktop? Okay, yes, absolutely, although it does take a little getting used to. And to make sure that I understood this, I forced myself to go only to Windows 8, running it on a Samsung 10-inch slate that is, of course, touchscreen. But most days, I plop that in a docking station, and I attach it to a 23-inch non-touch monitor, which, because Windows 8 actually believes people might put monitors one above another, you can actually organize in Windows 8 so that it knows that's what you have done. And, you know, there are days when I never touch the Samsung slate. Just everything is keyboard and mouse. Because once you get used to it, and actually if you look at our YouTube videos on Windows 8, there are two videos. There's one touchscreen edition and one keyboard and mouse edition. And you can do everything you need to do with either input device. And once you get used to using it with a keyboard and mouse, it becomes very natural. But again, it's a very different interface, and it really is two interfaces. When you're in desktop, things work really very much the way Windows 7 did, and otherwise they do tend to be a little different. Okay, looks like we have time for one more question. How does I've got two here. I'll try to get this one quickly. How would putting Windows 8 on something like the Fujitsu tablet be different from the Surface experience? Not much at all. In fact, I also use a Surface RT to get used to that. And yeah, they're different devices. Buttons are in slightly different places, but yeah, they really act very, very much the same way. I would imagine I'm not the guy that does like the installations in the back end, because of course the Surface is probably going to come with Windows already, whereas on a Samsung device you may be, because mine originally was a Windows 7 device and it had to be put on, so I'm sure that made a difference. But yeah, in terms of functionality, they look very much the same. Now again, to clarify, if it's a Surface device, it's Windows 8 RT. That's not what I'm running on my Samsung. The Samsung is an x64 device. It's running Windows 8 Professional because it's essentially a laptop without an attached keyboard. Okay, the other question I was seeing there, how does Windows Phone fit into this whole thing? I knew somebody was going to ask that. Pretty well. The person who asked this may have been aware that Windows Phone 7, when people were familiar with that, they looked at the new modern interface, they say, oh, I know where this came from. It came from Windows Phone 7. The interfaces are very similar. Part of their goal was the same interface on different devices. And so while the Windows Phone and Windows Phone 8 looks a lot like Windows Phone 7, the screen's a little smaller, so some things are changed, but the metaphor is really very much the same. And Windows Phone 8 even has a thing called desktop, which is a little different. But you get some of the same desktop apps. There are versions of Word, Excel, etc. for it. So yeah, it really fits into the continuum. It is a more different, actually RT and regular 8. There are like no differences. RT has desktop in it. It has File Explorer. It has Task Manager. When you're on it, it's hard to tell which one you're on. Because of the smaller screen, the phone does look a little different. Okay, we're coming right up to the end of our time. I really do appreciate your attention, sharing this time with us, that you shared information about your environment, which is very helpful to us, and I'm sure to the other participants, and also your questions. Because actually at PC Helps, that's what we like best, is answering questions. Okay, so we actually are right up on our time. We promised we'd get you out of here on time. Again, thank you very much for your kind attention. Please let us know if there are any other things that you would like us to cover at some point in the future, or any specific questions that we can try to get back to you on. At this point, we'll be concluding the webcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude the webcast for today. Have a great day, everyone.